Karen Frankel here in Perth saying hello. Let's get back to some basics, all about getting you drawing. Get drawing is my motto, and sometimes we forget about some of the basic underlying principles that we need to remember pretty much every time we draw. I'd love them to become part of your muscle memory, your brain memory, part of those developed neural pathways in your brain, so that you don't even have to think about them. It'd be so great if you do it automatically, and your work will improve out of sight. The first thing that I am going to say and remind you is that drawing, the very, very fundamental basis for, in my opinion, for pretty much all art, and I will qualify that, is observation. I know that there are many, many artists who don't draw and paint realism. There are many, many artists who produce abstract work, who produce stylized work, so it doesn't look particularly real, all of that sort of thing. For me, observation and realism are two separate things. Yes, you can get to realism from observation, and you absolutely need to observe if you want realism, but as far as I'm concerned, you also need observation even if you're doing abstract work. Okay, no matter what your end result, your starting point is observation. So even if you are painting through therapy and you're painting through your mind and through your dreams and through a spiritual feeling, your observation in that case isn't necessarily visual. So your observation is about you getting in touch with your feelings in that case. But always it's an interrogation, if you will. I'm trying to find a better word than interrogation, but a conversation with yourself maybe. It's about being curious. Most of the time, and how I teach drawing, I teach from a traditional standpoint, so I do talk about observation, visual observation, and we draw from that. How's that for a lovely pun? But it is the starting point of all of our work. You may change it, or you may have observed something so well that you're so familiar with the scene or drawing pairs that you can draw them in your sleep. And even if you don't look at something every single time you draw it, your previous observation, your previous understandings of the world, your previous sight, hearing, all of those observations will have an influence on how you draw. But that is the starting point. So musicians, they will be influenced by what they hear. You can't divorce it. I'm not saying they copy. I'm saying we are all, humans are the result of all of our experiences as we grow. Let's hone that down from the conceptual observation that I've been talking about to observation more specifically for traditional drawing. And as I've already said, it is about asking questions. Okay, that was that interrogation word. It is about being curious. So I guess it's a difference between if you're asking somebody, if you're having a conversation with somebody, they're not only hearing you passively, but hopefully they are listening to you actively. So they're hearing what you were saying, they're listening for something they can respond to. Well, the same thing for observation. If we're just going along and we happen to be looking out the window idly, or we're glancing up at TV, we're looking around the room. Yeah, that's observation, but it's not really looking. Or maybe it's not observation, it's just looking. So when we are observing, when we are looking to be able to draw, we need to look in a specific way, and that is honing in on observation for drawing. How do we look at things so that we can draw them? And that, for me, obviously, is where it comes to. When I look at any subject, when I'm just randomly walking down a street and I suddenly think, oh, the light's fantastic, I wonder if that'll make a good photograph, or let me look through my camera, and I half close my eyes. I think people must think I'm a little bit strange, but I do it all the time, just as a natural instinct. And what I'm looking for is one of my favorite phrases, shapes of tone. I'm looking to see, can I observe, can I see some interesting shapes? And if you can see me, I'm half closing my eyes looking at this, I can see these different sets of tones, and I'm not worried about these tiny blemishes on the pear. That's why I'm half closing my eyes. I don't want to see all of this. That's detail, and it's extraneous. At the very end of my drawing, I can put some of that in if it's going to improve the work. But basically, I want to see, are there some lovely darks and lights? Even on that pear, there's a little bit of light going down one side. Look at these gorgeous shadows that are being cast. This pear is casting its shadow on that pear. So for me, that is my first observation. Half closing my eyes and seeing if there are shapes of tone. Now, one of the biggest problems with that is the world is full of color, and sometimes it's really difficult to see those shapes of tones, and this is something that you need to practice. So even if you are not drawing, you can practice the observation. And one of the best ways of helping you practice is, shift that over to the black and white, is particularly on your mobile phones. Most of us have got the ability to change a photograph into black and white, and it's so handy these days because we've all got that phone in our hands. We can take a picture and we can find on the edit button. It's fairly simple. It comes automatically generally with the camera apps that we all have, and you can change your contrast, or you can change the picture to black and white. And because we're drawing mostly with black and white, or monochromatically, obviously not black and white, there's lots of different tones in between, that helps us to see these shapes of tone. Now, I often think that we actually see too well, so another reason for half closing your eyes or squinting your eyes is at the outset, I actually don't want to see too many tones. So I'm moving on from, observation encompasses tone, which is what I'm talking about now, and proportion. So I haven't got to proportion yet. When I'm talking about tone, what I actually want to see is simplified tonal shapes. So I don't want to see or be concerned with all the tiny changes. They will come as we progress through our drawing. What I do want to see is a simplification of those tonal shapes, and I want to be able to know or no, not know, I want to observe and make a decision about how those tonal shapes are going to fit in with what I want to draw. And hopefully, or this is a reminder about our 5-tone ladder. Tone 5 is your darkest dark, so I might have a look with my half closed eyes and I might go, okay, these tones here are my darkest dark, right? So I'm making a decision. I'm making an artistic decision with my artistic license. Those are my strongest tones. And sometimes, I'm just going to get rid of that and put a new one on. Sometimes the shape of the tone is not necessarily the shape of the subject. So my 5-tone, in this case, what I've just outlined there and what I'm going to outline on that one, it's spilling over from the pear onto the surface. It's all the same tone 5 as far as I'm concerned. And I can then go, okay, I'm going to include that in tone 5 even though I can see it slightly lighter. And I'm going to call that number 4, and I'm going to call that number 3, and I'm going to call that number 2, and I'm going to call that number 1, and that number 1, and that number 1. Now I know it's not white paper. It's not completely number 1. It's just the lightest light that I am going to have on my paper in my drawing. Based on that observation, I've decided some tones, and I've decided those tones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, based on my tonal ladder. Have a look at my video on tonal ladder on my YouTube channel. Tone 5 is your darkest, whether it's with a 2B pencil or a 6B pencil. Tone 1 is the white paper, representing the lightest light, because there isn't any white on these pears. I'm just representing the lightest light. Number 3 tone, of course, is your mid-tone. Sometimes we work on colored paper. That might represent your number 3 tone. Number 4, somewhere in between. And of course, number 2, just a barely there tone, which is something there instead of white. So very, very important basic observation starting point. Half close your eyes, look for those shapes of tone. I cannot tell you enough of how important this is. Don't forget it. Try and do it automatically every single time you look at something. If I were going to draw it, what tone would I make it? The reason why that is so important is when we get down the track of our drawing and we've done our pear and we get involved and we've put our tone 3 there, whatever it is that we've decided, and we've put our tone 5 there, and we've put our tone 5 there, and we've done all the things, right? So we've filled in our shapes of tone in a very large, general way, something like that, okay? What happens, unfortunately, is, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that we zoom in on whatever it is that we're drawing, and we forget to look at the whole picture, and we zoom in on this one thing and we go, ooh, there's a dark there, and that's really dark, and and so I'm looking just at this pair and I'm going, these things, that's really dark there, and there's this big dark, and and if I look at this one, there's a blemish there, and there's dots there, and we get lost in all of these small details, and it starts to affect the whole pear without showing us just the three-dimensional nature of the original pear that those shapes of tone are going to give us. So to show things in 3 dimensions, which is what traditional drawing is about, we need to show these shapes of tone and be able to observe them so that we can show the simple form meaning the 3-dimensional nature of whatever it is that we're looking at. So that's darker there and lighter there, and there's a shadow on the table. Simple information that shows you that it's 3 dimensions. And when we zoom in and forget about that and forget to compare this to other parts of your picture, you end up with some difficulties. Next point for your observation, just a little reminder, something that is very, very useful, and I have made a habit of observing this every time I look. So not only am I half closing my eyes, squinting my eyes and looking for my shapes of tone, but I'm also looking for my negative shapes. Okay, as a reminder, the negative shapes are these shapes, the shape of this background here. Okay, if I go back to my the Photoshop, change my color. If I color in here with blue, I'm coloring in the negative shape between these pairs. And if you practice observing those negative shapes, you will start drawing these more accurately, the positive shapes more accurately. So I'm not saying you always need to draw by drawing around the negative shapes. I'm saying be aware, check for them. You know, there's this beautiful little space between that pair and that pair. Can you see that space traveling there? That's a gorgeous little space there. These two pairs are just kissing each other. There's just this point, tiny point going in there, and that red point going up. Both of those things separately provide such interest in your drawings. Would it be earth-shattering if you missed them out? Not particularly, but it will help you to observe. The next basic fundamental drawing skill that we need is also an observation one. The next one is about proportion, and it's probably the thing that gives people the most trouble. What I want to say about observing proportions is remind you about measuring with your pencil, and remind you that we are never ever measuring just, oh, the onion is that tall on my pencil. When you are measuring, you are always measuring proportions. It is always about how tall is it compared to how wide it is, or how big is the mushroom compared to how big the onion is. And I've just measured that on the screen with my pencil, and I'm quite surprised to see that that mushroom, the forward mushroom, is actually about as big as the onion is. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, so that was just me comparing the one to the other, and I'm comparing the width. So I've measured that distance on my pencil, and I've compared it to that distance, and I've discovered that it's pretty much the same size. And I've also discovered that that is pretty much the same size as well. So all I've done is that and that on my onion and my mushroom. Because you are not measuring size, you're measuring proportion, then what you are doing is you need to decide the size on your paper. So if I'm drawing a tiny picture and my onion is that big, my mushroom will be that big as well, and it will fit in. So these are in proportion to each other and in proportion to that photograph. If I decide that my onion is that big, then I can go, well, my mushroom, because I've measured the real thing, I've measured the proportions, I can measure on my picture, and I can make my, I have run out of paper, I can make my mushroom the same size as my onion, because that's what I have found when I measured the proportion. So if I put a circle there, I know my mushroom is going to fill in there. What I haven't done, and could have, is measured how big on the real thing, how big is the stalk relative to the mushroom. When you are measuring proportions of anything, please remember to use the same subject for your measuring every time. So if I'm drawing the next mushroom, that one in blue, I'm not going to compare this size to this mushroom, because I started with the onion as my reference point, as my yardstick. I'm going to compare this mushroom to the onion as well, because if I've gone slightly wrong or slightly out with this mushroom, then this one is going to be a little bit further out. So of course with onions and mushrooms it really doesn't matter that much if one is a little bit smaller than it was. Seriously, it's no big deal. But if you're drawing somebody's portrait and you have compared how big the eye is to that eye, and then you draw the nose and you compare the nose to the eye, but you get this slightly out, and then you compare the mouth to the nose, and the nose is already not the right size compared to the eye, you can see that the proportions of everything will go out and out and out. So on the portrait, I like to use the eye as my basic yardstick, and I measure everything compared to one eye, so that I've got a standard all the time. So very important basic skill of measuring proportions and checking those proportions. The next thing I want to say is every line that you put down, every shape that you draw, every tone that you fill in, you should always be referring back to something you have already done. So if I'm going to draw my onion that shape, we've already established that I want to draw this mushroom in the same proportion as the onion, but what I haven't mentioned is where is the mushroom relative to the onion. And so I need an added observation so that I can place this mushroom where it actually needs to be, and say, you know, if I put my pencil across there, across the top of the mushroom, where does it cut the onion? So cuts the onion about there. So the top of my mushroom is going to be there. There's going to be this negative shape here. Now that I've got that position, I can go, well, my onion is that size. In proportion, the mushroom fills the same as my onion. I'm now going to measure how tall that stalk is. Okay, so I've measured how much does the stalk protrude above the mushroom from that section. I can also measure how much does it protrude out from that section. Okay, so I'm estimating that that's a nice oval shape there, and there's another oval shape, so that it. So I've asked myself the question, I've been curious, where is this relative to that? how big is it relative to that? What I can also say, and this is getting back to observing your shapes of tone, how dark is this? Let me add my shadow in, for example. I can also measure shadows. You can measure whatever. Okay, so I'm now going to go, how dark is this tone here compared to this tone here on my mushroom? So it's always, you're comparing size, which is proportion, you're comparing tones, you're comparing shapes, angles of lines, all of those sorts of things. So you are constantly looking around your whole drawing and asking yourself questions. As soon as you find yourself lost in just one item, you know, as soon as I find myself lost in that mushroom and putting that hard thing on, then I've lost my picture, as far as I'm concerned. At the end, you can put that on, but by half closing my eyes, I can see this whole mushroom here. This side of the mushroom is as dark as the shadow. And I've just realized I didn't do a good enough observation of that because I've been chatting to you and not concentrating on my drawing. And if I look at those shapes of tone, I can actually see, yeah, there's a light shape of tone here with the shadow of the stalk on it, which I completely lost. So I had not observed it very carefully. And the whole of that side of the stalk is in darkness. And in fact, there is a whole YouTube video on, I think, drawing this particular picture with the onions. Why are we needing to do all of this observation in that particular way? Where are things compared with other things? How long are they? What direction are they going in? How dark are they? How big are they? How small are they? How bright are they? What's the negative shape? All those things is because your knowing brain is going to tell you otherwise. So it is your observation skills that you need to hone so that you can tell your brain, listen guy, go away. I'm going to draw based on observation, and I'm not going to draw based on what your head is telling you all the time. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye for now.